Welcome to the Puzzle People Pod. I'm here today with my co-host Emily, director of Puzzle People, as well as Kat, who many of you may know from the speed puzzling scene, and her Instagram where she goes by Kat Sucks at Puzzles. Our conversation today is on being neurodivergent and where puzzling fits into your toolbox. Welcome, Kat.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So today, I have two more La Puz mini puzzles that I'm going to be sort of doing at my leisure. And we will share these puzzles on our Instagram. So if you want to check out the puzzles, you're able to see kind of what we were able to get done. Full disclosure, I may use some movie magic because sometimes I get so involved in the conversation I forget to puzzle, but you will see them. And Kat, what are you working on?
I am working on a Ravensburger Elspeth puzzle lent to me by Josh. It's pretty complicated looking, very similar to the Nationals puzzle, but I wanted to work on something more busy.
I actually do have a puzzle today. I'm just going to go grab it quick. I will be right back.
I love that. Yes. It was the other day where we were talking to the JPA members and Ben was like, I have no puzzle and I bring nothing to the table. And I was like, that's not true, but also go get a puzzle.
Yeah, they're easy to find.
Okay, puzzle today is a 1,000-piece Mediterranean windows puzzle by Colors of the World. It's yet to be taken out, so I'm actually unboxing for the first time.
I like the idea that he's gonna just go full speed puzzle and like rip it open and bad. Well, on that note, Kat, I know you've been speed puzzling for some time now, but for those who don't know, what is your history with speed puzzling?
Yeah, I actually discovered speed puzzling a long time ago, and I had heard about Worlds or like the large in-person competitions, and I, in passing, kind of thought to myself, wow, that's really cool that people do that. I wish I knew more people that liked to do puzzles because I thought I would never find anybody else who was interested. So I kind of revisited it during the pandemic because I had bought some larger puzzles during that time just to, keep myself occupied while we were on lockdown. And just randomly, curiosity got the better of me, and I found the Jigsaw Puzzle Contest Facebook group. And I met some people on there who encouraged me to try it, and here we are. So 2021 January is when I think I had contacted that group, and now I'm in a completely different world, it seems.
Nice. I think, one of the first things you shared I think it was like actually the first time we met, it came up that you're neurodivergent. And as you know, our conversation today is about being neurodivergent, where puzzling fits into your toolbox. So I also think it'd be great to get a bit of history there and learn about when you first discovered you were neurodivergent. What was that experience like? How did it go?
I had a suspicion. So I had always known for my entire life that my brother had been diagnosed with ADHD. When we were in grade school, he had been medicated off and on for it. And I never really thought twice about that. I just, I didn't really have any curiosity at the time as to what it was. I knew that I had been tested for it as well. And because I wasn't on medication, I guess I had assumed that I did not need it, or that I didn't have ADHD, or I wasn't the same as my brother, because my brother was very much somebody who jumped all over the place and was kind of unable to sit still. He had impulse control problems. He broke a lot of bones when he was a kid, just a lot of stuff that was very much not me. I was very quiet. I was very shy. I was active and that I like sports and things like that. But, I never really considered myself to be in the same boat as him. I got in my master's program where I was learning to be a therapist, and I found myself becoming it's going to sound terrible, but becoming incredibly bored in my sessions with clients. And I'm thinking to myself at the time, I'm like, why on earth am I in this profession that I love? I want to do this, and I can't seem to focus for 45 minutes on somebody in front of me telling me about their life. So I, over the course of that, had kind of talked to my mother and asked her about what they had found when I got tested and like kind of trying to see if maybe I needed to be retested. And she sent me my original paperwork from 1993. And I read in the report that they had recommended that I be medicated and they had diagnosed me with ADHD at the time. And my parents had just not shared that information with me. So I think in finding out that information, I was kind of surprised, but also maybe a little bit, um, I think angry is probably a strong term, but I was certainly frustrated with the decisions that my parents had made just because of how much I had struggled in school, even if I had hidden it really well.
I think that's the case. I mean, I've learned with a lot of especially women and girls that a lot of times the focus or the diagnosis criteria is sort of more, it's based more off of like men and young men and those sorts of traits. So a lot of us get missed. Uh, on a personal note, I am 40 years old, and for the past few years, since I started to learn a bit more about specifically the autism spectrum, I started to identify a lot of those traits with myself, and it ultimately led me to getting a diagnosis late in life. And I think having that diagnosis has been really helpful for me personally. But one of the times I saw you, you shared that you were also considering getting an evaluation for that as well. Are you open to talking about that and kind of explaining what made you think about getting that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that like throughout the course of my life, and as many other people feel, I'm sure, I felt different than other people. I felt like I had different wants and needs than other people. I didn't feel like I met the expectations of my family. I felt like the things that I wanted to do were very much in contrast with the things that I should have been doing, just in terms of socialization and things like that. And I kind of let it go and just kind of shrugged it off as like this is just who you are and it's fine and all of that. I never really considered there to be a reason. And believe it or not, the thing that really tipped me off were a bunch of not just TikTok videos, but clients that I was seeing who had been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder and were describing things that were very similar to what I had been experiencing. I didn't need to. I was already a working professional. I already had my PhD at the time. Like I didn't need to seek out a diagnosis for any reason other than just understanding myself and how I fit into this world or don't fit into this world in ways that I'm expected to. Um, and I went and spoke with a psychiatrist who had been diagnosing women and girls. She specializes in late in life diagnosed women. Um, she's been in the field for about 20 years, and she spent a long time, at least 4 or 5 sessions, just interviewing me about my life, and then did some evaluations that were more validated and told me that I also am somebody who's likely on the spectrum. So I think I found that as for myself, just it felt validating, that there were a lot of experience because I remember waiting. I remember waiting for the call where I knew she was going to tell me what she thought. And I was so worried that she was going to say, no, you don't have it. And I was just, I was just going to have to be okay with just being weird, or feeling weird. Um, that it helped me, I think, to understand myself just that little bit more. Um, and I was lucky enough to have my insurance cover the whole thing. So, um, I don't think everybody needs to go through that process, but I think if you feel that a diagnosis would make you understand yourself better, I think it's worth it, or at least it was for me.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think this is something that we'll discuss in the film from my personal story, but I had a very severe anxious episode, which I think people would call like an anxious breakdown, for lack of a better term. And now looking back, especially after having this diagnosis, and part of why I wanted to get my diagnosis was I just wanted to know this about myself. And if it was the case, have a better toolbox to take care of myself with, because I now realize a lot of the things that I thought were maybe simply just anxiety were overstimulation or sensory components that I was not realizing or acknowledging, giving myself space to handle. And so for me, it's been, I'm still kind of on this learning journey. And what's interesting is I obviously I'm not I don't have a PhD like you do. I am just a filmmaker, and I have noticed though that there's these new sort of younger creators who are on the spectrum who are sharing a lot of their experiences. And something that came up for me was, again, like I grew up in the 80s, and I think there was very limited definitions of autism and what autism was. And all of a sudden, hearing some of these creators on social media share experiences around how they would never want to be sort of the center of attention at a party, and like these other sort of things that I thought I was just like super weird, and this was it. It was this moment of like, oh my gosh, I've never had an original experience because I'm just autistic. Like this is what's going on. And
No, and I think that limitation, right? That limitation comes from the view of what neurodivergence is being extremely narrow and rigid, right? And I think there are a lot of people, and especially, and I'll tell you one example from my diagnosis, but the fact that most research is really only done with young or middle teen white boys for neurodivergence, there's a whole swath of people that it just does not cover. And that would be completely missed, or people are looking for really, really severe sorts of symptoms that disrupt your life so much that you don't function, instead of kind of seeing the whole thing as what it is, which is a spectrum, right? And looking for all of the other types of things that could be internal experiences that maybe somebody isn't sharing. Because I know that through my childhood, I don't think I told anybody about what I was thinking or feeling, or that I felt weird, or that I felt like I didn't fit in, or that I had a hard time making friends or anything like that. I'm sure people saw it, but it wasn't affecting my schooling. It wasn't affecting my ability to participate in things like activities and like choirs and church and sports and things like that. So nobody really seemed to think it was a problem, and I didn't know enough to say something.
yeah, I mean, I think again, I think we're a similar age, and we grew up in in a way, different time. And so I'm excited to be part of, I think, visibility in terms of, because people being visible has helped me get to this point where I'm taking care of myself better. And I think it's important to be examples of what neurodivergence can look like, because I mean, I remember feeling like an alien, and my mom's response was just, oh, your dad feels the same way. Uh, so like for me, it was like, oh, I guess maybe this is normal, but the reality is there was something else going on.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm curious. I mean, you mentioned that your profession, you work in the mental health space, and I think that's a really interesting perspective, especially when you were first seeking a diagnosis, and you said you did it, just to help understand yourself better. Was that a struggle to see another professional, or were you comfortable doing that? And I guess, like, how was that process, speaking with a psychologist and getting the diagnosis?
Yeah. I think I think that it was helpful for me, particularly because of who this professional was, and that she did have a load of experience in the field. And she had been recommended to me by my psychiatrist, who I see for anxiety, because specifically because I was interested in that diagnosis. Is it hard for me to see other professionals? Yes. I have a hard time with people, so let's think about it. I'm trying to say this in a way that doesn't make me sound like a complete asshole. So I need a mental health professional who knows more than I do about the thing that I am seeking information about. And that is not common, but with autism spectrum disorder, I don't know very much other than what I have seen in my own clients who come in who already have the diagnosis. And um, I specifically didn't look any of the symptoms up before I saw her or take any of the validated measures other than the one that I had taken to say, yes, you probably should be screened for this. I think that the person that I saw was very knowledgeable. I think she helped me to feel comfortable that she would give me an answer that I was confident in whether or not that diagnosis was there. Um, had it been a different mental health professional, that might not have been the case. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it seems like, you obviously have a background in it and you want to feel still validated and comfortable with the professional you're speaking with and not, second guess their opinion, right?
Yeah, yeah. And there must have been like a significant reason why I might have missed it in myself, which is why I needed somebody who knew more about it than I did and who was very experienced in the field. And specifically, I was happy that she was somebody who had a lot of experience with diagnosing people later in life, specifically women, because I think that that was really important to me as well.
As taking a step back, what made you pursue a career in as a mental health professional and also to get a PhD? What was their driving force or inspiration?
I had a therapist when I was in grade school. I think I had one in middle school as well. For if there were some family issues at the time, and my parents trying to be proactive, I think wanted to head off any potential problems that there would be. And I just never liked any of them. I never thought that any of them saw me for who I was. I never felt like any of them really put forth the effort to explore what I might be experiencing because I kind of shut everybody down. Um, in that, like, I could pretend that everything was fine, or I would come in and, um, you know, you know, try and avoid the questions and be able to avoid the questions in some situations and talk about just the happy things that are happening. So for lack of a better explanation, I felt like the care that I was getting was super shitty. And by the time I hit seventh grade, I decided that I wanted to be that person um, who wasn't going to miss those things. Or if I couldn't elicit a response out of whoever was sitting in front of me, letting them know that I knew that they didn't want to talk about it and that that was okay and that I could advocate for them to not be there if that's what they wanted or to help them to see why it might be beneficial to them if that's what they wanted. Um, I just wanted to be better than my experiences.
Are there other tools that you bring into your practice that you're comfortable sharing that you feel you would have liked to have happened when you were younger?
I don't know that there's specific tools, but I do think that even just my personality, being accepting of whoever is in front of me and being curious about things that I don't know about. I think the stance of wanting to learn as much from my clients about themselves as they want to learn from me about how to do better, or to feel better or to function better. I wish that I had had those things. Um, as well as maybe just people who are able and willing to think outside the box. Maybe what I needed was a younger therapist or a neurodivergent therapist. Um, but, in hindsight, it's been so long, I don't even really remember what would have helped other than just somebody being more curious about me.
Do you think, and this is something I've been thinking about a lot lately, there is a connection between being neurodivergent and mental health? And I already shared an example, but about how essentially I was diagnosed with an anxiety disorder, but now knowing that I'm on the spectrum, it's completely changed the conversation around the anxiety that I experience. And even something like I went to the movie theater for the first time with headphones because I now understand that the sound is really overwhelming for me at times. And it was something that brought the experience that can be actually, and I am a filmmaker, I love movies, but I have always had this feeling of just panic at times in the theater. And I'm realizing and making these connections that this isn't panic, it's me being completely overwhelmed by the sensory experience. And so now I've started to take care of myself in that regard. So I'm curious if you think that there's a connection between managing these two parts of us.
Can you rephrase that question so I'm clear what you're asking?
Yeah, the question is, do you think there's a connection between managing being neurodivergent and mental health? As in, like, when you start to understand how to take care of yourself better,
Oh,
it helps your mental health.
yes, yes. And I mean, I think what just happened in between us is a good example of that, right? Because I didn't fully understand what you were asking, knowing that I may be thinking about things differently than you. I knew that I needed to clarify, right? And if I hadn't, how might I have answered that question? Not fully, not from the heart, not in a place where I understand that it's okay for me to need clarification sometimes. Um, I think the ability to know what your needs are and that they come from a place other than you just being different, you know what I mean? Or like having different needs or be here. So here's what I think. Let me back up. When you have children who have parents, caregivers, siblings, whoever, and you try to take them to a place like the movies, and the movies are too loud or too overstimulating, or um, it's difficult for them to sit still. What do you think they do? What do those people that are in charge do?
I mean, from experience, you get called difficult and
Yep.
you're told to calm down.
Stop being difficult.
Yep.
Why can't you just do this?
Hmm.
Right? Instead of, hey, I see that you're having a hard time sitting in movies. What do you think would help you be able to do that? Let's try some things. Let's practice. Let's see what we can do to make this more comfortable for you so that you can figure out how to go to the freaking movies and enjoy it, right? Like it's not about fit into the box that everybody's told you you're supposed to fit into. It's about what do you need in order to feel comfortable and exist, right? For myself, I think it's the same with overstimulation. Like I encourage headphones in my clients because I wear them. I express that if somebody's uncomfortable wearing a certain kind of clothes, that it's okay for them to seek out something that looks like dress pants but are actually sweatpants, right? Like there's no reason that you have to do what people are saying you have to do if you can find a different way to do it outside the box.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that's so important. And I also actually think that brings me to puzzles because um, I have started to use puzzles as a way to make socializing easier. And it's something that started through this project in some ways, because initially I was having to do, or I was, kind of dipping my toes in, wanting to understand this community and really starting to enjoy doing puzzles at a more leisurely pace, I should say, than the speed puzzlers. But I realized that it made it so much easier for me to invite somebody over because a lot of times I have friends who will say, "Oh, like, what are you doing?" And it's so open ended for me. And to be able to say, "Hey, would you like to come over? I'm going to do a puzzle and I'd love for you to join me." it gave us an activity and a way to, connect and hang out without me feeling like, oh gosh, what do I have to say? What topics do I need to think about? And all of the kind of things that go on in my head. And so I'm curious for you, where do puzzles fit into your toolbox in some way? Are you using them as well? Kind of in a way to help you, maybe in a way I haven't even thought about.
I guess what I would say is that it was brought to my attention by the psychologist that had interviewed me that the possibility that doing puzzles is something that calms my brain down. Um, I think knowing what I know about ADHD and the similarities between ADHD and autism and how there's crossover in symptoms and there's that need for your brain to just constantly be occupied. It doesn't surprise me that when you have something to do with your hands, that it is easier for you to use your mouth because you have to take your time. You have to think about doing more than one thing at once. Every piece that you get gives you a little hit of dopamine in your little brain, right? So there are so many things about puzzling that I think make it perfect for somebody who's neurodivergent, but also enjoys puzzles, right? Because there's other types of activities that would do the same thing. I think Legos is a good example. I think sewing and knitting are good examples. I think video games are good examples that if you just know that this is something that you need, if you know that you need to go to an important meeting with some sort of a fidget toy or a stress ball in your hand because you need to be occupied in order for your brain to function the best that it can, then yeah, I mean, I think it absolutely fits in. I think it is something I wish was more portable, something I wish I could take with me everywhere. But you use it where it makes sense, and in other places you find other tools that do something similar.
You don't have those mini puzzles that are like 200 pieces where they're like this big each one you could
So I
take
I do, but the struggle is the puzzle surface, right? So like I'd have to find um like a portable table or something like that. But yes, I do take the little ones sometimes.
I was gonna say, I thought your struggle would be more because you do them so fast.
That's another, I can't do them more than once either, which is different from when I was a kid. When I was a kid, I used to do, now granted, it's because I have adult money and adult time to, to buy new puzzles. But when I was a kid, I used to come home after school and like speaking of overstimulation, right? School was really hard for me just for a lot of reasons. Academically, I think I was bored. The work wasn't particularly difficult, but I just didn't enjoy being there. And socially, it was hard. So I think at school, I was always very overstimulated. So when I would come home from school, I needed that decompression time. And I would sit in front of the television, and the television would be running in the background. I'd be half watching it, and I'd do a puzzle on a table. I'd take it apart. I would do it again. I would take it apart. I would do it again, like over and over and over again until I was calm, right? But I don't need to do that anymore, which is, I guess, a good thing.
I always joke there were signs, where in retrospect, it's just so obvious. And one of the things I was reading Unmasking Autism because that
Mhm.
was one of the books that was recommended. And in the book, the author asks for somebody who is on the spectrum to think about if you looked at your life and you were like, I am my happiest. This is the most amazing thing. If every day was like this, I would be so stoked. And they ask you to figure out what that looks like for you, what that is. And every single one I wrote down was me, these times in my lives where I literally just like played video games for an entire day straight. And I was so just immersed in that world. And it felt so reinvigorating. And not a single one of those memories was or moments was with other people or with a lot of other people. And this is not to say that I don't like other people and that I am not wanting social connection or anything, but it was so telling that the times that I have felt most rejuvenated, safest, and happiest in many ways was me doing an activity like that.
Mm. So, I think I can kind of add to that, but also semi-counter it too, right? Like I'm sitting here, it's 3:30 on a Friday. I've had kind of the whole day off because I got my hair done today for like 4 hours. Um, I am there. I have access right now to the newest World of Warcraft expansion, and I am extremely excited to play. um, but that was one of my pastimes, but I prefer games where I'm playing with other people, and I think a lot of it is because I did have a lot of struggle communicating with friends in real life, that having that social interaction online was really safe and really comfortable for me, and I was still able to get the social interaction that I was craving without it being so high pressure, or needing to do it while I'm doing something that I don't enjoy, right? Out in public or out where it's loud or at a concert or like going out to dinner or like whatever it might be that I would have been doing at that time. I think it's something that I end up talking to parents about a lot, when I'm working with like neurodivergent teens, that they're worried that their kids aren't talking to anybody or they don't have very many friends or they don't want to spend time with their friends. And I say, well, are they online? Are they gaming? Are they gaming with other people? Because maybe that's what's comfortable for them today. Do we want to move forward with that and change it a little bit? Sure. We want them to be able to talk to people in real life. But for now, look at how they're socializing differently as where they're at and decide if you're okay with it in that context instead. Yeah.
Totally. I also think, and this is something actually I've seen in the puzzle community to a degree. There are a lot of friendships that are made online, where for someone like me, I have several friends who I call internet friends, and they started as someone I met in some sort of forum over a shared mutual interest. And kind of from there, we had this back and forth and we got to know each other. And then almost after a year of like communicating online, I met them in person and it was great. And I think that I remember telling my partner, it's like, oh, I'm going to meet my internet friend. And he was like, wait, sorry, what? Like, please explain that to me. And I realized it was like, oh, wow, it's interesting because that is, to your point, it's a way to communicate and to socialize that feels just really natural and fun and good, I guess. And I think that,
Well, and your friendship is built on already having something in common, which I
yeah,
think is one of the scariest things for people when you don't know who's in front of you, is what are we going to have to talk about?
for sure. For sure. And I definitely think that, I've heard multiple stories of people, neurodivergent and not in the puzzle community who have come together, especially, if they started puzzling during COVID and then they found this community and then these events came back. And so I think I'd love to talk about what has your experience been? Because I know that you've made, I'm sure, some connections online through speed puzzling. What was it like meeting those people? How was that for you?
So I was actually very surprised. Um Historically, even if I have known people online or if I've, talked with them or seen them or chatted with them, I think that I've always still been afraid that for some reason I'm not going to fit in the way that I want to or in the way that I'm expecting myself to. And I think over the course of the 3 years that I have been involved in this community, my definition of what friendships look like and what I'm personally capable of in terms of forging friendships and um, being social. It was probably the only time in my life that I've ever gone to an event and really felt like I belonged there. My first experience was Winter Carnival in Minnesota in 2022. It was my first in-person competition. It was my first competition as a team. was meeting some of my team members for the first time there, and we won that year. I don't think anybody was expecting it, including us. And just being able to socialize with people, even though I was nervous, even though I was like still not sure like who these people were and what they were going to be interested in and whether I'd have anything in common with them other than puzzles, the more time I spent with them, the more time I spent trying to meet new people and branch out and put different people on my team and try to talk to new people. Um, it's been, I wish I had experienced it when I was 15 instead of 35. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. But I kind of think for us, sometimes like that lived experience has gotten us to a place where we can even get in the door at those kinds of events. And that leads me to this next question. I've been asking people if they have advice or a tip for somebody who maybe is a little bit intimidated about coming to an event like this. And so I'm curious if you have anything to share. Yeah, I'm curious if you have any thoughts in terms of how you can make an overwhelming event like nationals, which is still fun, maybe a little bit more palatable.
Yeah, I mean, so I think that it's, again, like all of my answers are from my perspective. So I think that that needs to be said before I fully respond to that. I think that it's very easy to feel like things are not going to be good when you get there. I think it's very easy to feel like you're going to be overwhelmed. If you know what you think you might struggle with, preparing for those things, right? If you feel like you need to walk around with a pair of headphones on, even if nothing's playing in them, just to tolerate the number of people that are there, I can understand that. Events like nationals, I think, are easier to integrate into because there's so much downtime for socializing and getting to know people, but doing it while you're doing a puzzle. And it's really easy to just sit down and start doing a puzzle. Even if you're not talking to somebody, somebody eventually will talk to you, right? And if you're not comfortable with that, that's okay. If you feel like you need to stand up and go somewhere else, that's okay. If you feel like you need to take a break and go back to your room and just relax, or leave the space and take a break and come back, like all of those things are fine. And nobody is going to tell you that it's not. Right. So I think that that's probably the biggest piece of advice that I could give is know what you need in order to feel more comfortable, even if you're not 100% comfortable. Know what you need to feel more comfortable and make sure that you have that. And then as an aside, right, like people are always welcome to message me directly and say, here's who I am. I'm nervous about going. And I can talk them through that individually too. And even if it's just meeting up with me and me introducing them to some people.
I'm curious if at these nationals, is there a sense of community in terms of seeing some new faces and approaching and being like, "Hey, welcome to the community," or what's the general atmosphere that you'd say?
Yeah, I think that that was probably the case when it was smaller, but because it's getting bigger now, it's not quite as easy to know who's new and who's not, because smaller groups have kind of formed of people who know each other and talk regularly, people who have internet presence or Instagram presence or YouTube presence or whatever, um, and their little groups, right? It doesn't mean that you can't get into a friend group, but it certainly means that it might be more intimidating for you to ask or to start talking. Um, but I think I've never met a more welcoming group in my life, and putting yourself out there is the hardest part of it.
Yeah, it seems like, and you mentioned this earlier, sort of having that common interest, things to talk about, that can really be the easiest conversation starter. Everyone's there to do the one thing, which is puzzles, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like in on the other side of the coin that it's hard to actually get to know people all that well because all you talk about is puzzles? Like for example, I'm in a homebrewing community, and I think I've known people for like 3 to 4 years, but couldn't tell you much about their lives other than they just really love certain beers.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on how much time you spend with each other. The example of nationals this past year was that there was a communal puzzle that everybody was working on like the entirety of the weekend. It was 51,000 pieces. There were 600 people working on it over the course of the weekend, and they did finish. But you kind of run out of puzzle things to talk about, right? So then you start saying, okay, where are you from? What do you do? What do you like to do besides puzzles? Tell me about your family. Tell me about your pets. Tell me about what you think about going to Worlds. Tell me about whether you think you'll come back next year, right? What other puzzle events are you going to? Maybe we can hang out. Maybe we can go get some food, right? Like those are the kinds of connections that I think form is like it starts small and then you get to know people better, right? And I think my teammate Gray is a really good example of that. That like Gray and I, had we met on the sidewalk, I don't think we probably even would have talked to each other because we're both shy and we're both people who don't seem to have a lot in common on the surface, right? Um, but given that catalyst of we're going to talk about puzzles, we're going to nerd out about puzzles, we're going to nerd out about competition with puzzles, and then we're going to get to know each other. We're going to spend weekends together where we're sharing hotel rooms because neither of us want to pay full price. We're going to spend a lot of time making sure that we recognize that we both need a break, and we're going to go sit in our hotel room in silence and not talk to each other for an hour because that's what we both need, right? But then you have those later night conversations where you're talking about family and you're talking about marriage and you're talking about your dogs and you're talking about your parents and your childhood and things like that. And I think it just comes with time, um, and finding the people that you would be the closest with. Because I don't know that I would do that with everybody that I've met, um, but I can certainly do it with her, and I'm fortunate to have met her.
Yeah, I think the traveling component is a big part of that, right? Lots of downtime and you get to know a lot of people.
Yeah.
Is there anything unspoken that etiquette wise that people might want to know in a competition setting? And one of the examples we got from the JPA, which was really helpful and not something that I would think of as a newcomer, asking people who are at a group doing a puzzle if they're speed puzzling specifically so you don't mess up their time kind of thing.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that's a good question to ask. As far as etiquette, do you mean like during a competition? Do you mean like in between competitions? Like, what are you
I
talking
mean
about?
all of it, because I do think when you are coming into a whatever community it is, or be it like, a gym or whatever, these spaces have sort of these rules that are often unspoken, and it can be hard to figure out as a newcomer. So, for example, knowing that just because you see a bunch of people puzzling together doesn't mean you can just pull up and
Oh, true. Okay.
like, that's the kind of thing I'm looking for, because like, that's not intuitive, for example, to me. I would have no idea, and hearing that, it's like, "Oh, wow, that makes so much sense." Like, I would be that's a very good thing to be mindful of going in.
Yeah. So I actually think, yes. So I do have something that I would probably share with people. I think it's pretty common sense stuff to not be an asshole. Um, this is a community that people are supportive of one another. People encourage one another, whether you're winning or losing. For the most part, everybody is just happy to be there. What I would say from that perspective and keeping that in mind, if you feel like somebody is being standoffish or maybe a little short with you or rude or whatever, keeping in mind that this is a community that does carry a lot of people with neurodivergence. And what you're seeing and reading and feeling in people may not be accurate. based on how you're feeling, if you're feeling rejected, if you're feeling like they're not being very friendly, right? Like I fell victim to that at nationals. I had a friend come up to me and talk to me like she knew me. And because I only knew her through Instagram, I had no idea who she was. I I I looked at her face and I'm like, you look kind of familiar, but like I don't really know who you are and I don't know why you're talking to me. So I was kind of standoffish, right? Um and I ran into her at an event later, and thank God I did, because I apologized to her because I recognized that it was kind of a weird interaction and I didn't like how she walked away. Like, it felt like she was a little hurt. So I made sure to say to her, like, just in case you felt kind of like I was being standoffish, here's the reason why. I really didn't know who you were until you walked away. And then I was like, oh, I, I know who that is. I should have been nicer. Oh gosh. And so, yeah. So I think that that's a really important thing too, that if you're not sure if somebody's not being nice to you, you're probably experiencing somebody who's having a reaction that they can't necessarily help, or that might be because they don't know who you are, or because they're nervous or shy or something along those lines. So just taking time um, to get to know people and taking the time to recognize that your first impression of somebody is not always going to be your second impression.
Yeah, I think that's always a good reminder. Ben, do you have anything else? Otherwise, I think we will.
Yeah, I gotta say, there's something to this puzzling and talking. It's kind of nice. It's the first time doing it in all these episodes, but
No, it's
I
really,
did.
it's a game changer. And you know what's interesting is I like want to run I do obviously a lot of interviews being a filmmaker. And it's like I want to run all my interviews now with puzzles because I think it just relaxes people. And we spoke, they're gonna remain nameless, but somebody I approached to be on the podcast, I could tell they were a little apprehensive. And I always want to make sure that people have a good experience with us and I want to make them comfortable. So I sent questions over ahead of time and all of this stuff. And she told me when it was all said and done, she said it was so fun. She wished it was continuing. And I know, to be honest, that's just because she wanted to keep puzzling. But I am happy to have forced her to take time out of her day to puzzle when she probably would have been at work. So
Good.
great. Well, Kat, thank you so much for being a part of this. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends. You can find us on Instagram at PuzzledPeopleDoc.
And if you know someone who you think would make a great guest on this podcast, reach out to us. Ben at chickenwingpictures.com.